Don't read that. My father's voice cracked across the ballroom so sharply that forks stopped halfway to people's mouths. The host blinked, a cream-colored envelope suspended in his hand. "Mr. Carter?" I said, "Put it down." Dad forced a laugh and reached toward the microphone. "It's just a private family note." Across the room, my twin sister Emily frowned. "Dad, it's from Naomi. Why wouldn't we read it?" The envelope slipped open. A single photograph slid onto the podium. The host picked it up. My father lunged forward. "Give me that." Too late. The host had already turned the picture toward the audience. The room fell silent. Then he unfolded the handwritten card resting beneath it. "My name is Naomi Carter," he began, "and before anyone celebrates tonight, I need you to answer 3 questions." My father's confident smile disappeared. For the first time in my life, I watched the man who always controlled every room realize he was about to lose this one. He reached for the microphone again, but the host instinctively stepped backward. Everyone's eyes stayed fixed on the letter. Nobody noticed my father anymore. And that was exactly the moment everything he had hidden for months began falling apart. Introduction. 3 months earlier, Emily and I had stood side by side, wearing identical black graduation gowns outside the law school auditorium. We had survived every impossible semester together, the endless case briefs, mock trials that lasted until midnight, bar exams looming over every conversation. Whenever one of us wanted to quit, the other refused to let it happen. "You know we're crossing this stage together," Emily had whispered before graduation. "We always do," I had smiled. We were twins. Doing things together had always been our tradition. At least, until our father decided only one daughter deserved to be celebrated. A week after graduation, Emily excitedly called me. "Naomi, Dad booked the Grand Wellington Ballroom. He says it's going to be huge." "I'm happy for you," I answered honestly. "You are coming, right?" Before I could answer, another call flashed across my phone. Dad. His voice sounded unlike anything I had ever heard. He was crying. "Naomi," he gasped, "your mother's bleeding internally." I stopped walking. "What?" "The doctors won't operate until we cover the emergency costs. Insurance won't approve everything in time." My knees nearly gave out. "How much?" There was a long pause. Then he whispered the number. $42,000. I didn't negotiate. I didn't ask for paperwork. I didn't even think. I transferred nearly every dollar I had saved since college because no amount of money mattered if it meant saving my mother's life. Dad called minutes later. "You just saved her," he said quietly. I'll never forget this. But after that night, he almost disappeared. Every time I asked about Mom's recovery, he rushed off the phone. Every time I wanted to visit, there was another excuse. "She's sleeping. The doctors don't want visitors. Maybe next week." Weeks turned into months. Then social media filled with photographs of Emily's upcoming celebration. Crystal chandeliers, a live string quartet, luxury floral displays, a ballroom that must have cost tens of thousands of dollars. I stared at every picture until one impossible thought settled into my mind. If Dad had been so desperate to save Mom, where had he suddenly found the money for all of this? I didn't know it yet, but the answer was already sitting inside an old family photo album. I pulled the worn photo album from the top shelf of my apartment closet and set it on my kitchen table. It wasn't the photographs I wanted. It was the dates. Dad had always insisted on printing every family picture with a timestamp across the bottom. Normally, I found it obsessive. That night, I was grateful. I turned page after page, trying to remember where Mom had been during the week Dad claimed she was rushed into emergency surgery. Nothing. Then my phone buzzed. "Dad." I stared at his name before answering. "Hi, Dad." His voice was calm now, almost cheerful. "Emily's celebration is this Saturday." "I know. You should come." I waited. He hadn't called to apologize. He hadn't called to thank me. He hadn't even asked how I was doing. Instead, he said, "Don't make this about yourself." The words landed harder than I expected. "I've never made Mom's surgery about me." There was silence. Then he replied coldly, "I'm talking about your sister. She deserves one day where nobody feels sorry for you." The line went dead. I lowered the phone and looked around my quiet apartment. $42,000. Months of silence. Now a warning. For the first time, I wondered whether Dad wasn't avoiding my questions because he was grieving, but because he was hiding something. The next morning I called home. Dad answered before the second ring. "Mom's resting." I didn't ask if she was. A pause. "I just want to hear her voice." "She's exhausted. I'll only keep her for a minute." Another pause. Then, unexpectedly, I heard Mom in the background. "Who is it?" "It's Naomi," Dad answered. "Oh, put her on." His hesitation lasted only a second. Then I heard the familiar warmth in my mother's voice. "Sweetheart, I've been wondering why you haven't visited." I frowned. "Dad said you've been recovering." "Recovering from what?" My heart stopped. "The surgery." "What surgery?" I gripped the edge of the kitchen counter. "Mom, the emergency surgery Dad told me about." There was a long silence. Then she laughed softly, sounding genuinely confused. "Honey, I haven't had surgery." I couldn't speak. "I had a routine consultation with my cardiologist months ago," she continued. "Everything turned out fine." My breathing became shallow. "So you've never been admitted to the hospital?" "No." "No emergency?" "No." "No operation?" "Naomi." Her voice became cautious. "Why are you asking me this?" Before I could answer, Dad's voice suddenly cut in. "I think she's getting tired." The phone clicked. He had ended the call. I stood frozen in my apartment. Either my mother had somehow forgotten a life-saving operation, or my father had just lied about the biggest emergency our family had ever faced. Neither possibility made sense. By afternoon, I had reopened every email Dad had ever sent me. The discharge summary looked official at first glance. Hospital logo, physician's signature, billing information. But now I noticed details I had ignored before. The fonts didn't match. The spacing shifted from page to page. One page used a different hospital address than the others. Even the doctor's license number seemed oddly formatted. I refused to accuse my father based on suspicion alone, so I called the hospital. "I know you can't release private medical records," I told the patient services representative. "I'm only trying to verify whether my mother underwent emergency surgery on this date." "I can't discuss a patient's treatment," the woman replied politely. "I understand." There was a brief pause as she searched the system. Then her tone changed. "Ma'am, I can't provide medical information." "I know, but I can tell you there is no surgical admission associated with the date you mentioned." I closed my eyes. "I'm sorry?" "There is no emergency surgical admission matching what you've described." The room suddenly felt too quiet. I thanked her mechanically before ending the call. I wasn't crying because of the money. Money could eventually be earned again. What broke something inside me was realizing how carefully Dad had chosen his lie. He hadn't claimed the roof needed repairs. He hadn't said he lost his job. He had chosen the one thing he knew I would never question: saving my mother's life. For the next 3 days, I considered driving to my parents' house and confronting him face to face. Every version ended the same way. He would deny it. He would destroy evidence. He would somehow convince everyone I was overreacting. Then, on Thursday evening, another message appeared on my phone. "Dad, we're all excited for Emily's celebration. Don't make this about yourself." No explanation. No mention of the hospital. No mention of the $42,000. Just another warning. This time I didn't reply. Instead, I opened every old family photo stored in cloud backups and began comparing dates with the timeline Dad had invented. Hours passed. Then one image stopped me cold. Mom stood smiling at a charity luncheon. She wore the same blue dress she always saved for church fundraisers. Behind her hung a banner displaying the event's date. The timestamp printed across the bottom matched the exact afternoon Dad had claimed surgeons were fighting to save her life. I stared at the photograph. Then I whispered the only words that made sense. You planned this. The next morning, I began gathering evidence instead of answers. The Grand Wellington Ballroom looked less like a graduation celebration and more like a society wedding. Crystal lights hung above white linen tables. A string quartet played beside the stage. Servers moved between guests carrying trays of champagne. At the center of it all stood Emily in a silver dress, smiling for photographs while Dad welcomed relatives as though he had personally created her success. 2 daughters through law school, Uncle Raymond said, shaking his hand. That couldn't have been cheap. Dad laughed. You do what you have to do for your children. Aunt Patricia glanced toward the empty chair beside Emily. Apparently one of them couldn't be bothered to show up. Dad sighed loudly enough for the people nearby to hear. Naomi has always struggled when attention isn't on her. Emily's smile disappeared. That's not fair. I'm only explaining her absence. You don't know why she isn't here. Dad placed a hand on Emily's shoulder. Tonight isn't the time to defend her. Across the room, several relatives began whispering. They had already decided what my absence meant. Jealousy, resentment. Bitterness that Emily had received the celebration I hadn't. None of them knew that the champagne in their glasses might have been purchased with the money I sent to save my mother's life. Shortly before dessert, the host stepped onto the stage. We have one final surprise for our graduate. Emily turned toward him. Dad's smile remained fixed until the host lifted a cream-colored envelope. This was delivered earlier today by Naomi Carter. Emily's face brightened. She sent something? Dad's expression changed instantly. He rose from his chair. That can wait. The host looked confused. It's listed as part of the evening program. It shouldn't be. Emily laughed nervously. Dad, relax. It's probably just a card. I said open it later. The room quieted. Dad rarely repeated himself. He usually didn't have to. But Emily had spent 3 years learning how to question arguments instead of surrendering to them. She looked directly at him. It's addressed to me. A few guests nodded. The host carefully opened the envelope. Inside was a framed photograph and a folded letter. He lifted the picture first. Mom stood beneath a banner at the Riverside Children's Foundation luncheon, smiling beside 2 women from her church. The date was clearly visible. June 14. Dad had called me at 1:17 that afternoon. By 1:42, I had transferred him $42,000. He told me Mom was unconscious in a surgical unit. The host turned the photograph toward Emily. Her smile faded. Mom, she said slowly, wasn't June 14th the day Dad said you were in the hospital? Mom leaned forward. In the hospital? Dad moved toward the stage. Give me the envelope. The host hesitated. Emily stood. No. Read the letter. Emily. Read it. Dad climbed the first step to the stage. The host unfolded my card. His voice was uncertain as he began. Emily, I am sorry I could not attend your celebration. You deserve to be recognized for everything you accomplished. Emily pressed her lips together. The room remained still. But before tonight continues, there are 3 questions our family deserves to have answered. Dad reached toward the microphone. That's enough. The host stepped back. Several guests turned in their chairs. My father had spent years teaching everyone that control looked like confidence. Now, for the first time, they were watching that confidence crack. The host continued. If Mom was undergoing emergency surgery on June 14th, why was she photographed at a charity luncheon that afternoon? A murmur moved through the ballroom. Mom took the framed picture from the table nearest the stage. She studied it. I remember this event. Dad looked at her. You were confused that week. I raised her eyes. No, Harold, I wasn't. The host read the second question. Why has the hospital confirmed that no emergency operation occurred under Mom's name on that date? Dad's face lost its color. Emily turned fully toward him. What hospital confirmation? He ignored her. The host continued. And if there was no surgery, where did the $42,000 I transferred go? The room went completely silent. Even the musicians had stopped playing. Emily stared at Dad. 42,000? Mom slowly lowered the photograph. What is Naomi talking about? Dad reached the stage and grabbed the edge of the podium. This is a misunderstanding. Emily stepped between him and the host. Then explain it. Not here. You told Naomi Mom needed surgery? His jaw tightened. She doesn't understand the full situation. Did she send you $42,000? Dad looked around the room. Relatives who had mocked my absence were now avoiding his eyes. The accountant seated near the back had gone very still. Emily's voice dropped. Please tell me she's wrong. Dad opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Then a chair scraped across the floor. Dad's longtime accountant rose slowly from his table, holding his phone in one hand. I think, he said, I know where the money went. Every head in the ballroom turned toward Mr. Daniel Foster. For nearly 20 years, he had handled my father's accounting and tax filings. He wasn't just a financial professional. He had attended birthdays, anniversaries, and every major family gathering I could remember. If anyone in that room carried quiet credibility, it was him. Dad's voice hardened. Daniel, sit down. Daniel didn't move. I can't. You don't know what you're talking about. I know enough. The ballroom remained silent as Daniel slowly walked toward the stage. Emily looked at him. What do you mean? Daniel adjusted his glasses before answering. About 3 months ago, your father asked me several unusual questions. Dad cut him off. Those conversations were confidential. They were about accounting procedures, Harold, not legal privilege. Daniel looked directly at Emily. He wanted to know whether payments for a private event could be made from multiple personal accounts without attracting attention. Several guests exchanged uneasy glances. I assumed he was planning a surprise anniversary, Daniel continued. He never told me where the money came from. Dad stepped forward. That's enough. It isn't. Daniel reached into his jacket and removed a small notebook. I wrote down the dates because the requests were unusual. He opened it. The first venue deposit. He read the date aloud. Emily's eyes widened. It matched the week Dad had claimed Mom was in intensive care. The second catering payment. Another date. The orchestra. Another. Each one fell only days after the $42,000 transfer Naomi had mentioned in her letter. Nobody spoke. The silence became louder than any accusation. Emily slowly turned toward Dad. Tell me these dates are wrong. They don't prove anything. Then prove they do. Dad folded his arms. I'm not discussing family finances in front of everyone. Mom looked genuinely confused. Harold. He refused to meet her eyes. What finances? Before he could answer, several phones chimed almost simultaneously. Emily looked down. A new email. The sender. Naomi Carter. Subject line. Hospital confirmation. Emily opened it immediately. Attached were scanned copies of the hospital's official response. No emergency admission. No surgery. No inpatient treatment. No operating room records. Only a routine outpatient consultation weeks earlier. Mom leaned closer. Her hands began trembling as she read every page. She looked up at Dad. I never had surgery. Across the ballroom, more guests opened the same email. Naomi had copied every close family member whose address she had. The documents spread through the room faster than whispers ever could. Dad noticed. His composure vanished. Give me the phone. He reached toward Emily. She stepped backward. No. Emily. For once, she held the phone against her chest. You're going to answer instead of taking something away. Dad grabbed for her wrist. She pulled free. Gasps echoed through the ballroom. It was the first time anyone had seen Emily refuse him publicly. Mom stepped between them. Harold. Her voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. Don't touch her. Dad stopped. For the first time all evening, he looked uncertain. Emily swallowed hard. Did Naomi really send you $42,000? He didn't answer. Answer me. I was going to repay it. The words escaped before he could stop them. The ballroom erupted. People who had remained politely silent all evening began speaking over one another. You what? He admitted it. 42,000? Mom stared at him as though she were looking at a stranger. You took our daughter's savings? It wasn't like that. It sounds exactly like that. Dad had raised both hands. I borrowed it. You said Mom was dying. I needed time. For what? He looked around the room. No answer sounded believable anymore. His excuses had nowhere left to hide. Emily's eyes filled with tears. My entire celebration. She looked around at the chandeliers, the flowers, the orchestra, the elaborate decorations. Was paid for with Naomi's money, wasn't it? Dad remained silent. That silence answered her better than words ever could. Emily slowly removed the commemorative plaque the event organizer had just presented to her. She placed it on the podium. I don't want this. Emily, I said I don't want it. Guests watched as she stepped away from the decorations she had admired only minutes earlier. Nothing about the ballroom felt celebratory anymore. It felt like evidence. She looked directly at her father. What else have you lied about? Before Dad could answer, Mom calmly walked toward the stage. Without saying another word, she reached for the microphone. The room fell silent once again. Everyone knew whatever she said next would change this family forever. Naomi's mother stood at the microphone for several long seconds without speaking. The silence carried more weight than any speech could have. She looked slowly around the ballroom. At her daughters. At the relatives. At the guests who had arrived expecting a joyful celebration. Then she looked at Harold. I need everyone here to hear this. Her voice was steady. I never had emergency surgery. The words landed like a physical blow. I never went into an operating room. I was never admitted to a hospital. I never asked Naomi for $42,000. She held up the photograph from the charity luncheon. I was here that afternoon. She turned the picture toward the audience. We spent the day raising money for children's medical treatment. Then she looked back at her husband. So I'd like to know why my daughter believed I was dying. Harold opened his mouth. Nothing came out. For years, he had always found the right explanation, the right excuse, the right way to control every conversation. Tonight, there wasn't one. Emily slowly walked toward the stage carrying her phone. I checked the emails Naomi sent. She looked at the hospital confirmation again. Everything matches. She opened another attachment. It contained Naomi's bank transfer receipt. $42,000. Transferred to Harold Carter. She opened the next file. A timeline Naomi had prepared. On one side were the dates of every payment Harold made for the ballroom, catering company, orchestra, decorators, photographers, and luxury transportation. On the other side were Naomi's transfer records. Each major celebration payment followed shortly after Naomi's money reached Harold's account. Emily stared at the dates. Then she looked around the ballroom. The crystal chandeliers. The imported flowers. The expensive table settings. She spoke so quietly that everyone leaned forward to hear. My sister paid for this. No one argued. No one could. Several relatives lowered their eyes in embarrassment. Only an hour earlier they had criticized Naomi for refusing to attend. Now they understood why. Aunt Patricia stood first. I owe Naomi an apology. Uncle Raymond nodded. So do I. One by one, family members admitted they had believed Harold's version without ever asking Naomi what had happened. The realization spread through the room. The woman they had judged most harshly had actually sacrificed the most. Harold finally found his voice. I wasn't trying to hurt anyone. Emily looked at him. You told Naomi Mom would die. I intended to pay her back. When? I just needed more time. Mom shook her head. You didn't need time. You needed honesty. He looked desperately from one daughter to the other. I wanted one unforgettable night for Emily. Emily's eyes filled with tears. You stole my sister's future to give me a party I never asked for. I was trying to celebrate your achievement. No. She slowly removed the graduation sash she had been wearing all evening. You were trying to buy recognition with Naomi's sacrifice. She folded the sash neatly and placed it on the podium. I can't celebrate something built on a lie. The applause that had filled the ballroom earlier was gone. Instead, guests quietly began leaving their tables. Some stopped to hug Mom. Others offered condolences to Emily. Several approached the stage simply to say one sentence. "Please tell Naomi we're sorry." Daniel Foster stepped beside Naomi's mother. "As your accountant, I have a professional obligation now." Harold closed his eyes. "You don't have to do this." "I do. You've admitted receiving money under false pretenses." He spoke carefully. "The forged medical paperwork, bank transfers, and hospital confirmation create serious legal exposure." Harold understood exactly what that meant. This was no longer only a family argument. It had become a matter of fraud. Within days, Naomi formally met with investigators. Daniel provided financial records. The hospital supplied written verification that no emergency surgery had ever been scheduled. Digital copies of the fabricated discharge papers were examined. The forged documents became some of the strongest evidence against Harold. The civil case concluded first. The court ordered Harold to repay Naomi the full $42,000, along with interest and additional financial penalties. Separate criminal proceedings addressed the forged medical documentation and fraudulent representations used to obtain the money. By the time everything was resolved, Harold's reputation had collapsed. Friends who had admired him for years no longer trusted him. Professional relationships disappeared. Even relatives who continued speaking with him did so cautiously, knowing how easily he had manipulated the people closest to him. For Naomi, recovery came more slowly. Receiving the money back did not erase what had happened. It couldn't restore the months she spent believing her mother was fighting for her life. It couldn't erase the sleepless nights or the guilt of thinking she hadn't done enough. But something else changed. For the first time, she stopped measuring love by how much she was willing to sacrifice. She learned that trust should never require abandoning common sense. Emily visited Naomi the weekend after the celebration. Neither sister talked about the ballroom. Neither mentioned the decorations. Emily simply placed 2 coffee cups on the table. "I should have asked why you weren't there." Naomi smiled sadly. "I should have asked more questions before sending the money." Emily reached across the table. "No more letting other people come between us." Naomi took her hand. "No more." Months later, after both sisters officially passed the bar examination, they organized a much smaller celebration. Their mother helped prepare homemade food. Close friends filled the backyard with laughter. There were no crystal chandeliers. No orchestra. No luxury venue. Just people who genuinely wanted to celebrate both daughters equally. As the evening ended, their mother stood between Naomi and Emily for a photograph. This time, there were no secrets behind the smiles. No lies hidden beneath the celebration. Only truth. Naomi looked at the camera, then at her sister, and quietly realized that exposing her father's deception had cost her a parent she thought she knew, but it had given her back the family that truly mattered. The night meant to celebrate one daughter became the day both sisters finally saw their father for who he truly was.